Hi and welcome to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. I hope you're having a beautiful day today. For our video today, we are inspired by the Regency or Georgian era of jewellery. So I am going to show you how to make this form in wire. Now I've expressed it here as the little pendant, but on the board I have that as a collar with repeated stations featuring the same design. So let's head down to the board, we'll take a look at that, and then you can decide whether you want earrings, a pendant, or a little collar like I've made. So this is the form that we're going to learn to make today, and I've added a little bit of a wrapped loop and a spare bead up at the top of this one. But on the collar, I've added it repeated with a simple loop up at the top. So it's very easy to adapt to make earrings, pendants, a collar like this using that design over and over again. It's relatively simple. And what we're going to do is grab a slightly heavier wire. Now, because I want this to stand up to being sort of freestanding, as it were, I did play around with adding a bead and wiring it all together, but it looked overly fussy and I preferred the cleaner lines. So you do have the option, if you want to set beads into the swirly sections, you absolutely can, but I'm going to create it in a freestanding form with a slightly heavier wire. So the wire I'm working with today is silver plated copper core medium temper, and this is 1.25mm or 16 gauge wire, so a little heavier than I normally work with, and this is a 12-inch length. Now we probably won't need absolutely all of that, but luckily enough I've got these little designs to add between the stations, which are very simple, and they work very nicely with a 1.5 to 2 inch offcut of this wire. So if you do have some left over, you've got something to use it for. So we're going to start off by warming and smoothing the wire through. Very cold here today. And I'm going to grab in my little memory wire finishing pliers, as they're a great way to start this open spiral, which is where we start on the design. So I'm going to use the 2mm side. If you don't have these, you could of course use your multi-step bail makers, which I'll be grabbing in a moment anyway, or any round nose pliers. So first thing to do is to make sure that you flush cut that end. That is flush cut, but it was on a bit of an angle and I want it to be nice and flat. So we're going to use the memory wire finishing pliers, round nose pliers or bail makers to start by creating a slightly tapering spiral. So I've got the best part of a round form to begin with, like so. And then I'm going to grab in my flat pliers. And the first thing I'm going to do is to push the cut end against the continuation of wire, just so there are fewer bits that are likely to get stuck on clothing. I'm going to give that a little bit of a squish, just to make sure it's nice and strong, before I start bringing the wire around, opening and closing those flat-facing pliers to allow me to circle the wire around. Now I'm going to go for around about 2 turns from that start point, just to give me a nice size. But I'm going to look to replicate the size of that spiral that we're creating. So I'll probably aim for something as big as the largest pin on my bail making pliers, which I think is 12mm, but I will have a look. So continue to bring the wire around in an opening spiral, and you can take your time. I've just closed that up a little bit much. I'm going to open that back out and continue until I get a good size. That to me looks pretty decent, but before I commit that to being squished and set, I'm just going to give that a little bit of a pinch to make sure that I'm happy with the overall shape. I might take that around just a tiny smidge more. Once I'm happy with the size and form of that spiral, I'm going to just give this a very light hammer. So I have my mini block and chasing hammer, and I'm just going to give that a little bit of a set. So I'm going to pinch down to make sure that the spiral doesn't move out of shape. Once I've got the first bit set, it's easier to kind of let it go free and hammer the other side. And I'm actually going quite gently with that hammer today, which is opposite to how I normally use a hammer. I normally smash things flat. So if it does go out of shape at all, you can pinch it or open it if you need to, but that's actually stayed really nicely in shape for me. So what we're going to do now is to just bring this up so that you've got the continuation of wire coming away in the direction of your dominant hand. So I'm taking it away to the right. You may prefer to mirror this if you are left dominant. Just going to warm the next couple of inches of wire through. When you hammer wire, the hardening kind of travels along a little bit, so we will have firmed up the wire just coming away from that spiral, and I want that to be nice and fluid. So we're going to bring in the next round form, and I'm going to use the number 6 step on my multi-step bail making pliers. I just want to make sure that this is a nice fluid transition from one direction of wire coming back in the other direction. So just make sure that you're happy that that's nice and toasty warm, and that there's no funny kinks or anything in there that you don't want to see. So I'm going to use number 6, pop that into position, and then I'm going to show you from the side, just turning the wire around. So you can see that that spiral is starting to have an opposite turn. And just bring that all the way around. So I'm going to do it little by little, and then draw the wire back across. So once you've got the start of that shape, you can see the round form created by the outside of the spiral needs to be about the same size. If at this juncture you see that your spiral is much larger than the round form you've chosen to use, you can either use a slightly larger round form, or you can close up that spiral tiny little bits at a time, whichever is best for you. Once you're happy with that second section, we're going to give it another little tap with the hammer. You can see that my thumb is protecting the crossover point. That's to prevent any accidental strikes on where the wire crosses over itself, because we don't want to weaken the design by smashing one layer of wire on top of another. It's very rare that I will actually use a project where you're hammering down on wire that has been crossed over, and it's usually only when there's a great big spiral of it. So you can see that the continuation of wire, looks a little bit like an ampersand, is coming away next to the outside of our start point where the spiral is. We've gone around, we've done a loop, and we've come back in the opposite direction. So again, because we've hammered, and again because it's very cold here today, I'm just going to warm the next section of wire through to ensure that when I bring those bail making pliers back into position, I can get a nice fluid shape. And again, we're going to be switching back in the opposite direction once more, remembering which step of those pliers or which round form you used. So if I show you just up like so, it's a little bit blurry because it's above the focal distance. I'm going to rotate in this direction, so coming back around. And I'm going to almost push the edge of those bail making pliers against, just here, the outside of the second round form that we made. Nearly, but not quite. So let's pop those back into position, and then I'm going to draw the wire probably underneath this time. And what we're looking to have happen is for that wire to disappear behind the design. And then I'm going to flip that over in the opposite direction. At this juncture, I may well hammer just here as well, just to give it a little bit of residual strength in wear, but I might do that off camera. What you would need to do is just protect any crossover points and make sure that you're hammering just that outside edge. So you've seen me hammer plenty of times, you don't really want to see me do that again and again. So we're going to use the number 6 on the bail makers again and bring the wire back in the opposite direction once more. So a little bit more warmth added to that wire just to make sure it's nice and fluid. Add the pliers into position and rotate the wire all the way around, bringing it back underneath the whole design and sending it underneath the spiral. So at this stage, you might be able to see that this side is smaller than this side. So what I'm going to do to fix that is put the bail makers back into position and just unrotate it slightly, draw the wire back up again, and you'll see that it's very, very easy to fix that. So just draw that outwards if you need to get these two to become basically a pear drop in this direction and a pear drop in this direction that match each other for size and form. So I'm going to take a couple of seconds just to get this sitting exactly how I want it to sit. And again, you can put the pliers back in and just rotate it until it sits exactly. And then I'll hammer the outside edges and I'll join you back in just a second. So take your time and don't be afraid to take your time. When you come to create something like this, it really will bug you later if things are on the squonk. So just take a couple of moments to make sure that everything sits exactly how you want it to sit before you commit it to the hammer and block. Let's head back down to the board and I'll show you how to continue with this design now. So I've just evened this up as much as I can. There's a little bit of work hardening on each of the 4 points coming away from that central nexus, and everything is sitting as evenly as I can get it. We're going to flip over to the rear of the design now, and where the continuation of wire crosses over the very middle, we're going to pinch firmly with those chain nose pliers and bring the wire up towards the 12 o'clock position. Now it's slightly on the wonk at the moment, so let me just address that and we'll check it from the front. What we're looking to have is that line to go up through the very centre of our starting spiral. Now, if you want to add a bead to this design, you will need to check that your beads have adequate drill holes. Now, I found that most of my rose quartz beads that I had a little stash of, they're mixed colours, different strands, most of them have a 1.25mm drill hole. So what you'll find is if there's even the slightest kink in your wire, you may be able to detect a slight kink there. Even a good drill hole bead won't travel smoothly. So you can rescue a design idea by just taking care of your wire. It only took a second to get that wire nice and straight towards the top to make it easy for the bead to move down. So I'm going to show you how to create this as a standalone pendant design, which adds on this extra tiny little wrap, and it stops the bead from wiggling around. On the collarette that I crafted, I made a simple loop just above that bead. So you have the opportunity at this stage to add a very simple loop just at the top. But today we're going to add a tiny extra wrap, which means I'm going to allow about 1.5mm above that bead, which is a very tiny smidgy amount. Bring the wire forwards and I'm going to create a loop. Now I'm going to use the 4mm pin on my memory wire finishing pliers just to bring that wire around. You could of course make it a larger loop if you wanted to add it onto ribbon or something similar. So we've got a rounded loop. If you wanted to create the design to go on a collar like so, very simply cut away at this stage and treat it as if it's a jump ring and make sure that the cut end sits firmly against that little angle change at the top of the bead. However, today we are going to grip across that round form. We're going to initially bring the wire all the way around the core above the bead one time. So grip very firmly, bring the wire all the way around and back to the front of the design. The front is the bit where the spiral sits on top of the wire. So once you've got that into position, we're just going to make sure that we're happy with that wrap. And then we're going to smooth and warm through this tail. Give that a little bit of grace and elegance and smoothness, especially as a moment ago I had to give that a little bit of help. So what we're going to do is to bring the wire from the front of the core wire, where it's starting, and I'm just going to chase that around the edge of the bead to the back of the core wire. And what I'm going to do now is very softly lift up the spiral like so, and pinch firmly whilst I bring the wire all the way around and to the rear of the design again. Once that sits on the rear, I'm going to trim this away. So I've got a little bit of wire left over to make one of the other stations on that little collarette. What I'm going to do is just pinch this home to make sure that the sticky uppy bit doesn't stick up anymore. So once that's nice and tidy, let's just tighten that up. You can bring that down to the final position. So just give that a bit of a wiggle if it's come out of true. So there you have your finished Regency inspired pendant. So there you have your Regency inspired pendant. There were a lot of bows and quite romantic jewellery during this era. So that's certainly something that you can express as a pendant by itself. You could size it down for earrings. I would very much recommend sticking to that heavier 16 gauge or 1.25mm gauge wire, as it does need to have a little bit more strength. You don't want it to catch on anything and come unravelled. I'll show you now how to make the other very simple little stations, just in case you want to recreate the Regency inspired collar that I have on the desk. Let's make some small drop stations to sit between those Regency inspired pendants on the collarette. I have a 2-inch length of that offcut of 1.25mm or 16 gauge wire. We're actually going to start by creating the simple loop. I'm going to use the 2mm pin on my memory wire finishing pliers just to generate a small loop. So we're going to start off by creating a round form where the wire meets back towards itself. You can see that kind of touches just up here at the top. Then I'm going to use some fine tipped chain nose pliers to draw the straight line of wire away, and you can play around with that to make sure it's nice and neat. But we do want it to come away at a right angle. So let's just close that wire up so that the cut end meets onto the continuation of wire where that angle change takes place. And then we're going to introduce our chosen bead. I went for the same size, and these rose quartz beads. I'm going to hold it so that the simple loop we've made is in opposition to the desk. I'm going to cover the bead with my thumbnail and bring the tail of wire away towards one side. It's about 45-degree angle change at the bottom there. I'm going to now bring in my multi-step bail makers, and I think I'll use step number 4, and I'll bring that just over halfway along the length of wire that's sticking out the bottom of the bead. What I will then do is just rotate that back towards the bead and just take it out and make sure that I'm happy with how that's looking, and just little by little bring the cut end back towards the angle change underneath that bead. So just little by little you can rotate that until it sits where you need it to. Now I have made that a little bit high, so you've got 2 choices. Because I actually want these to all be as similar as possible, normally I would suggest just trimming away the last millimetre up at the top, but I'm going to actually fix this so that it sits exactly right, utilising the same amount of wire, and then you've got these little spacer drops that are all exactly the same. So bring that number 4 on your multi-step bail makers back into position, and then just open it out slightly and pinch. You see where my finger is going here? I'm just going to pinch that together, and then I will probably finish off utilising my flat chain nose pliers to make sure that that sits exactly how I want it to sit, which is just a little pear drop at the bottom of that bead. And then if you make those in a little production line, you can check that they're all as similar as you need them to be, and then you can link them into your small collarette. They are also really cute as little earrings independently. If you were going to wear them as earrings, I would very much suggest hammering that lower pear shape because it doesn't connect to anything. You do have the option, of course, of creating a wrapped loop like we did underneath the bead just here, taking a slightly longer tail, so instead of 2 inches, maybe 2.5 inches, and bringing that around one time. If you're wearing them as earrings, that's well worth doing, but I'm creating these as little stations, so they're going to sit between the Regency inspired designs on that little collarette. Thanks so much for watching. That was your Regency inspired pendant and collar tutorial. Now this was a challenge set to me by Katie and Fleur over on the Your Craft Lounge vlog. If you've not already watched it, I'm going to link that. But this is the tutorial for the challenge of the month of February. It might not come out in February, but do have a look at the vlog if you haven't already. Thanks so much for watching me here at the Gemhawks YouTube channel. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, hype, and all of the other wonderful things that you can do to help me be seen by the wider YouTube community. Have a great day, and I'll see you again soon. Bye bye.